some of us began to research what was in the background. We could see for ourselves the number of Hispanics. We could see for ourselves that these cotton mills are now closed. But nobody really understood why. And of course, when nobody understands why, that always leads to people making bad suppositions, right? And it also leaves people open to be guided in the wrong ways and giving misinformation about why this is, right? And so it was interesting for me to try to understand this for myself. So I want to give you some background information on the North American Free Trade Agreement to start our talk tonight, all right? That will lead us into the Central American Free Trade Agreement, and then that will move on into my trip to Guatemala this year to investigate the effects of free trade on that country. The North American Free Trade Agreement was passed in 1994, and the reason that was given at that time was that in order for us to sell more goods to Mexico, we had to make sure that the Mexicans were making more money, right? And so by eliminating the tariffs so that there was no barrier to trade, obviously the people living in Mexico would have access to better jobs, would make more money, and would buy more American products. Well, who's against that, right? Back in our hometown, we'll make more products, we'll need to hire more people because the Mexicans will have more money because they'll be working to buy our products. Who could be opposed to that, right? And if you were concerned about the number of illegal immigrants living in your town, well, they wouldn't want to come here anymore, would they? They would all be living happily in Mexico. They wouldn't be coming to the United States looking for jobs. And so the vote in 1994 wasn't even close. It passed. It was a resounding pass in the U.S. Congress. Win-win situation, right? Well, it didn't take long after 1994 to realize, or maybe you could answer this question. Following 1994, on those two issues, illegal immigration and textile jobs, do you think that NAFTA improved either one of those? No. It was obvious to any person on the street that NAFTA did not improve either one of those, jobs for Americans or illegal immigration into this country. In fact, you could probably answer this. What has happened since 1994 with the number of jobs? Less. The number of illegal immigrants? More. All right? So you wouldn't have to be a student of economics, right? You wouldn't have to have a PhD in economics. You wouldn't have to do advanced study to recognize that the North American Free Trade Agreement was a failure. It was a failure, well, let me back up. It wasn't a failure for everybody. It was a failure for the people in my hometown because that factory is now completely closed. And it was a failure for the Mexican people for reasons I will discuss in a minute. But everybody didn't lose out. Who won? Who won? The factory owners. If you could close the factory in my hometown and move it to Mexico and not have to pay them American wages, where does the profit in that move go? Into your pocket, the pocket of the owner of the factory, right? So NAFTA was a win, a big win for the corporate executives and the CEOs. But let's see what happened to Mexico. If you take a Mexican farmer who is growing corn for his livelihood, this is what he does. He has a farm in Mexico and he grows corn to sell this corn on the market to make money to sustain his family. There is a level at which he cannot lower his price, because if he lowers his price below that level, he won't be able to feed his family. After NAFTA, was able to sell American corn on the Mexican market below his price. Why? The tariffs were gone. Yeah.
Mass production is gone.
Subsidies.
Subsidies. American farmers are subsidized. Thank you for your response. American agricultural products are subsidized. An American farmer receives a check to make sure that his income is always balanced to the market. So if he's a corn farmer and the price of corn drops, the American farmer does not take a loss. Right? And where does that subsidy come from? Does the American government snap their fingers and the subsidy shows up in their pocket? Where does it come from? It comes from us. When we pay taxes, the government takes your taxes and puts it in the pocket of the farmer. So that, my grandfather took a subsidy, right, when in some of his agricultural products, so that the farmers are never forced to sell their farms if they have a bad year, right? The problem is Mexican farmers do not receive this subsidy. So the Mexican farmer cannot compete on the open market because the American farmer can drive his price down. And if here's the price of Mexican corn and this is the price of American corn, whose corn gets purchased? The American corn. This is called dumping. It's a problem with free trade, is that America can dump agricultural products on that country. And even a Mexican who's buying products for his restaurant or for his tortilla factory or whatever he's going to do with this corn, he's going to choose the best price, right? Why would he buy expensive Mexican corn over cheap American corn? 1.5 million Mexican farmers went out of business because of NAFTA. And where did they go? They came here because you have to work and you have to feed your family. Or they went to work in the factories that were set up just across the border from Texas. All right? And this was supposed to be the boom, the industrial boom in Mexico, right? Now you have all of these factory jobs. So people no longer have to work for a subsistence wage. They can go and they can work for a better wage in a factory, right? But why didn't this work? Because the people who rented them houses, the people who sold them milk, the people who sold them clothes knew how much they were making and raised their prices. So here you are living in one part of Mexico, and you decide to sell your farm and move to this part of Mexico because you can no longer make a living growing corn. You're now going to try to make a living in this factory. The problem is everything is more expensive around the factory. You were living from corn season to corn season. Now you're living from paycheck to paycheck working in a factory. And when that doesn't work out, you still can come to the United States. So we can look back at 1994 and the people who supported NAFTA. I personally can forgive them. Hindsight's 2020. It sounded like a good idea, right? It didn't work, except for the CEOs. It didn't work. You probably didn't have to come here tonight to recognize that it didn't work. In 2005, by 2005, we have, help me out with the math, 1994 to 2005. 11 years of research and evidence that this is a failed policy. 11 years. An indisputable failed policy. And yet the American government decides in 2005 to pass CAFTA, the Central American Free Trade Agreement. But the interesting thing about CAFTA is that it didn't pass. It's been implemented, but CAFTA did not pass. What happened? Did anybody watch the night of the debates and the vote on the medical? What do we just get? Healthcare reform. Thank you. Thank you. Get by with a little help from your friends. Did anybody watch it? Did anybody stay up that night and watch it? No. You did? Yeah, it was very interesting to watch. Thank you. A few people did, so you know what I'm talking about. By the rules of the House, after so many hours of debate, the Speaker of the House says there will now be a 15-minute vote. You have 15 minutes to vote by electronic, device. And after 15 minutes, the gavel is dropped, the vote's closed. You either voted yes, you voted no, you didn't vote. It's a done deal. In 2005, when the Speaker of the House and all of the debate about CAFTA was over, he said just the same. He said, you now have 15 minutes to vote. Well, if this was 11 o'clock at night, what time was the vote over? You have 15 minutes to vote. What time?
Quarter after.
Quarter after. So at quarter after, at 11:15 that night, CAFTA was defeated. CAFTA was defeated. It was not passed. By the rules of the House, they had a 15-minute vote that was gavelled to begin at 11 o'clock, and at 11:15 it was defeated, but the vote was not then gavelled closed. So one by one, the oppositions to CAFTA came to the floor of the House and asked the Speaker of the House, why are you not gaveling this vote closed? This House is out of order. You're violating the rules of this vote. The 15-minute vote was agreed upon in committee. You must gavel this closed, and he ignored them. 11:20, 11:25, 11:30, 11:40, 11:45. All of the people who opposed CAFTA, one after the other, begging him to close this vote. All the while, in the gallery of the U.S. Congress, congressmen who had voted against it were being strong-armed by the leaders of their party to get back in there and change your vote. And 3 did. 3 went back in and changed their vote, and as soon as the tally switched so that CAFTA had passed by 1 vote, the Speaker of the House gavelled the vote closed and declared CAFTA to be passed. CAFTA is as illegal as me going into the parking lot, drinking a gallon of gin, and driving 120 miles an hour down Wrightsboro Road. There's no difference in the level of illegality between me driving irresponsibly drunk down the middle of a busy highway in Augusta, Georgia, and the DR CAFTA vote. Were going to take place in Central America that took place in Mexico, and in fact they did. After the vote in 2005, we in Guatemala and other Central American countries experienced agricultural dumping. So now you see Guatemalans who are losing their jobs and losing their ability to make money in whatever agricultural activity that they're in. The Guatemalans have lost their ability to do that because of dumping. The other thing that NAFTA did, which CAFTA did as well, was the use of intellectual property rights. And what you have with that is that you have American companies claiming to have patents on certain products or certain medicines. And they can then sue the Mexican company who has an equivalent patent in Mexico. And I don't know if you've figured this out yet or not. The students at USC Aiken today certainly understood what I talked about. But if 2 people go to court, you know the one with the high-powered lawyer wins, right? So if you have a Mexican lawyer and an American lawyer competing in this arena over the use of a generic drug, who comes out on top? The American. And so you have lawsuits brought by American pharmaceuticals against Mexican pharmaceutical companies, and the Mexican pharmaceutical companies lose They lose. So then, what happens if you have, previously, you had a choice between buying the American medicine or the Mexican medicine. And the Mexican medicine was much cheaper, right? So of course people are going to buy the Mexican medicine. This is in Mexico, right? But if the American pharmaceutical company can eliminate this company's right or ability to manufacture and sell that, what happens to the price of this medicine? I've eliminated my competition. It goes up, all right? The devastating thing that happened to the Guatemalans in respect to this was that there was a Guatemalan pharmaceutical company that produced drugs for HIV/AIDS sufferers, people who had HIV and AIDS. And an American company sued them over intellectual property rights and won, and that company could no longer sell those drugs to people with HIV/AIDS. And so now many of those people do not have access to those drugs at all. At all. The other problem with CAFTA as it relates to Guatemala has to do with their judicial system. CAFTA ensures that workers have a right to make a grievance towards their employer. Right? They have a right to unionize, which is interesting because I don't have that right. I found that quite interesting in my trip to Guatemala, that Guatemalans have the right to organize. I do not. And if you live in North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, neither do you. So it's interesting that I had gone to Guatemala to investigate the effects of CAFTA on them and became a little bit agitated myself because they have rights that I don't have. College professors in South Carolina cannot unionize. High school teachers in Georgia cannot unionize. Factory workers in North Carolina cannot unionize. These are right-to-work states. You do not have that right. So, while the American government has long fought against labor unions in the United States, they were able then to take that on down into Central and South America. Because what happened with it was, before CAFTA, the labor unions were trying to scrap their way back to have some sort of power in Guatemala. But then CAFTA says, here's the way that you have to do it. And you have to do it through the legal system. And here's the system that you have to use, except that system doesn't exist in Guatemala. Their judicial system is completely broken. It is a failed judicial system. 93% of all murders in Guatemala go without any conviction. Crime against women is a very serious problem in Guatemala.